Daddy went with Grandma to Italy for a trip, just the two of them. My son, only 6 years old, told me with tears in his eyes, left alone in the room. Really? Is that true? They said only two could go, so I had to stay here alone, he explained. I rushed to my son and hugged him tightly. As a working mother, I had asked my husband to take care of our son during a 3-day business trip that fell over the weekend. But when I returned from the trip, I was greeted by a dark, empty house with my son left all alone. My husband and Sophia, my mother-in-law, in Italy, I had heard nothing about this. Leaving a 6-year-old alone at home to go on a trip is unbelievable, even as a human being. While suppressing my rising anger, I continued to comfort my son. It must have been tough, so lonely. If my son wasn't here, I'd scream out loud in frustration. Initially, my husband was cooperative in our marriage, but as our son grew, he gradually distanced himself from the family. He was always with Sophia, even on weekdays and weekends, practically living at his parents' house. Despite numerous attempts at discussion, he would excuse himself saying his mom was important, or worse, I'd be the one criticized. Feeling the limit with such a husband, I managed to keep working by leaving my son with my parents who lived nearby. This time, my trip coincided with my parents' vacation, so I had no choice but to emphasize to my husband the importance of his care. And now, this has happened. What if something had happened to our son? Does he even realize what he's done? So he can neglect his child to this extent? Is this the kind of man you are? I'm so disappointed. If so, you're no longer family to me. I kept speaking to my son. It's okay. You won't have to feel this lonely again. Mom will make sure of it. My name is Hazel. I'm a 32-year-old salesperson at a trading company dealing in machinery for businesses. My world is tough, with frequent business trips and entertaining clients, but I enjoy increasing sales and building a network across the country. I've been dedicated to the sales department since I joined as a new graduate. My husband, Tristan, works in the planning department of a subsidiary of my company. We seldom meet due to working in different offices, but we met at a large company drinking party and hit it off. After a few months of going out for drinks as friends, his transfer to my head office naturally led to us seeing each other more often. We already got along well, and this closeness led to a relationship. Years passed, and just when we started thinking about marriage, I found out I was pregnant. Though unexpected, marriage had already been on the cards, so we hurriedly visited both our families to break the news. Tristan's dad had passed away before I met him, and Sophia lived alone. Nervous, I carefully chose a gift and dressed meticulously, paying close attention to every detail, as I headed to his childhood home. However, my efforts seemed in vain, as Sophia's reception was cold. From the moment she opened the door, she looked at me as if I was an intruder, barely smiling. The coffee she served was surprisingly hot and weak. As Tristan explained our relationship, the pregnancy, and our marriage plans to Sophia, I kept a steady smile, not wanting to intrude on their conversation. I just wanted to show Sophia that I wasn't a harmful presence. It's one thing to plan a marriage, but to have a child first? That's really disappointing. Sophia muttered, glaring at me. Aren't you also involved with other men, carelessly and without class? Honestly, I can't approve. She said bluntly. Tristan, flustered, tried to convince her. It's not like that at all. Hazel has been dedicated to her work before and after we started dating. She's hardworking, serious, and definitely not into playing around with men. His earnest defense made me smile unintentionally. True to his words, I had been so focused on my job that I hardly had any romantic relationships. My closeness with Tristan stemmed from work, and I never had the leisure to play around. If I had free time, I would rather spend it studying to improve my work. If you say so, Tristan. I trust you. But this all work and no play? Women shouldn't push themselves too hard. Trying to imitate men without knowing one's limits is also bad manners, don't you think? Sophia continued to grumble, but ultimately agreed to the marriage. I anticipated disapproval due to the pregnancy, but being criticized for my career commitment was quite a shock. Maybe Sophia's generation couldn't understand a woman like me, but her attitude had been cold from the start. I was already filled with doubts about whether we could get along well in the future. We might face opposition to our marriage, huh? The walk home was rainy. Hiding my downcast face under my umbrella, I murmured, and Tristan laughed it off in a carefree manner. She ultimately agreed, right? Mom's been living alone and doesn't meet people often. She was probably just nervous meeting someone new after a long time. She'll be fine when she gets used to you. His cheerful voice resonated even amidst the rain. He might be trying to cheer me up, or maybe he genuinely wasn't bothered. His words made me reconsider my negative thoughts. I shouldn't judge someone based on first impressions. That's something I've always learned in my career. We still have a long way to go. Then, we quickly proceeded with our wedding preparations, issued our marriage certificate, and moved into our new home. We chose a location convenient for commuting and close to my parents' home. I wanted to continue working, even after having a child, so having reliable support nearby was essential. Tristan happily agreed to help out. During that time, I didn't have much interaction with Sophia. Whether she avoided me because she felt uncomfortable, or if it was out of respect for our family, I couldn't tell. Time flew by, and as my belly grew, I took maternity leave and parental leave. The company regretted my long absence, and I was concerned whether someone could fill in for me. Above all, I loved my work, and it was hard to leave. Juggling pregnancy and career was an endless struggle, but as I deliberated, the baby inside me kept growing. I promised to return to work and began my leave. Soon after, I gave birth to a healthy baby boy. Tristan, along with my parents, rushed to celebrate. Congratulations, you did great. Seeing my first grandchild's face brings me so much joy, my mom said tearfully. Tristan held the baby awkwardly and mused. It's a boy. I wonder what he'll grow up to be. But as long as he's healthy, that's all that matters. We named our son Scott. Saying Scott and us brought a flutter of happiness. After Scott and I returned from the hospital, Tristan, despite his busy schedule, helped a lot at home and took active care in looking after the baby. Caring for a newborn was tough, but Tristan was incredibly dedicated. You're a great dad, Tristan, I said jokingly, and he nodded in satisfaction. Mom raised me like this. It makes me want to do my best, too, he replied. That's when I should have felt more uneasy. Talking about our family and Scott, yet Sophia's presence kept creeping into our conversations. But I didn't pay much attention to it and said, It's going to be a long journey of parenting, but let's support each other. We lived harmoniously after that. Finding a childcare center for Scott was tough, so I extended my parental leave and immersed myself in parenting. Time flew, and Scott began to sit up, eat solid food, and grow stronger. Tristan, busy with work, started coming home early and helping around the house. He really had been, until recently. As Scott turned 1, Tristan's initial dedication slowly faded. He still came home early, but he stopped helping with the house or Scott, instead increasing his phone calls with Sophia. His conversations with me also revolved around Sophia. How she seemed lonely without friends, or how she didn't feel like cooking alone. This wasn't occasional, it became a daily occurrence, and I began to feel exhausted. I don't think it's wrong for him to communicate with his mom, but I wish he would spend more time on our immediate family. He was so enthusiastic when Scott was born. Why the change? When I struggled to feed our child who still had trouble communicating, I could hear Tristan talking on the phone with Sophia, his voice full of joy, a stone's throw away from me. That cheerful tone only intensified my irritation. Then, as another year passed, things got even worse. We used to have dinner together on weekdays and go out with Scott on weekends, but now Tristan spends most of his time at his parents' house. His parents' home is a drive away from his office. On weekdays, he heads straight there from work and doesn't return until after midnight. On weekends, I receive messages like, "Going straight to my parents from work." And even when I reply, "I'd like to spend weekends as a family," I'm met with silence. When I try calling, he dismissively says, "Sorry, I'm busy right now. Mom's house had a light bulb issue, and I'm fixing it." Indeed, Sophia might not be able to handle everything alone, but does he really need to be there every night for such trivial reasons? I could feel the blood vessels in my head pulsating with frustration. "Mom can't do heavy shopping alone. I help her with detergents, bulky condiments, and big purchases. She's alone, and I'm her only son. I have to help, right?" He'd justify. Phone calls and messages have proven he's indeed at his parents'. Not cheating. Perhaps that's a silver lining. Yet the fact remains he's hardly at home. Why can't Sophia let go of her son? Even though she's elderly, she could manage on her own or seek external help. Even if she relies on Tristan, she should let him go once his tasks are done. Why does she need him there all the time? I recall her cold treatment towards me when we first visited to announce our marriage. Amidst these troubling thoughts, I found myself in virtually solo parenting. Despite my competence and physical strength for my sales job, frustration mounted, and a cloud of gloom loomed over me. One day, when Tristan was at home, I confronted him seriously. "When you're always away, it's tough to manage everything at home. I'm lonely, and Scott needs to see more of his dad. Please increase our family time." That day, a torrential downpour surrounded our house, with the relentless sound of heavy rain beating against the windows. Tristan averted his gaze and made excuses with a twisted mouth. "What can I do if Mom is in trouble? She's at an age where managing the house and shopping alone is tough. You should understand that, right?" Maybe, but how about managing the difficult tasks for her in one go and spending other weekends with us? What about finding a balance? I suggested, trying to calm down an agitated Tristan. I didn't outright deny his reasons, but offered an alternative, a strategy I learned from work. "So you're saying I should schedule my visits and neglect her the rest of the time?" Tristan snapped back, becoming more emotional despite my attempt at a peaceful discussion. "How many times do I have to say it? Mom is lonely, living alone without many acquaintances. Don't you feel sorry for her? It's always about you. You don't care about my family." "That's too much. Please, let's calm down and talk this out," I pleaded. Tristan, leaping to conclusions and emotional, stood up from his chair with a loud noise, as if to end the conversation. Feeling hurt by his harsh words, I desperately sought a discussion. We needed to calmly discuss how we would manage our family and include Sophia in our plans. But with such an attitude, it was troubling. It seemed childishly immature for an adult, and I was honestly disappointed that this was the level of my husband's maturity. Outside, the thunderstorm intensified, and the roar of thunder began to echo. At the sound of a loud thunderclap, Scott started crying in fear. "It's okay. It was just thunder," I said, rushing to comfort him. When Tristan's phone rang, after a brief conversation, he casually said, "Mom can't prepare dinner because of the bad weather. I'm going over," and left. While soothing a frightened Scott and preparing dinner, I heard the door close and felt a headache coming on. I had just expressed my feelings. How could he disregard them so casually? Sophia was no better. Didn't she prepare any meals in advance? Every night, every weekend, endlessly keeping her son tied to her side. If her health was indeed so poor that living alone was challenging, there were hospitals and support services she could rely on. Yet I never heard such a suggestion from Tristan. Just like the storm outside, a cold tempest raged within me. In this unchanging situation, I finally managed to secure a place at a childcare center a few months later and decided to return to work. After a 2-year break, I was back at work, desperately trying to regain my professional instinct in the limited time I had. When work overlapped with childcare hours, I relied on my parents who lived nearby. Ideally, I would have preferred Tristan's help, but he was still absorbed in his parents' house. My parents, though disapproving of Tristan's behavior, happily took care of Scott, their beloved grandson. "Scott, you're growing so fast every time I see you. Children grow up so quickly," my mom said, lovingly preparing his favorite dishes. Her words were a warm solace to my worn-out heart. I started rebuilding relationships with the staff who replaced me during my leave and with clients, gradually increasing my sales figures again as a salesperson. "It's rare to find a female employee who can do so much while raising a young child. You're really something," my boss praised me. Gradually, I started to go on business trips again. Initially, I was troubled, but refusing them meant I couldn't continue my job, so I reluctantly asked my parents to take Scott overnight. They happily prepared a sleeping area, towels, and various things for Scott, and he seemed to enjoy staying at a different place. Time passed, and Scott entered elementary school. He was an excited first grader, his backpack looking oversized on his small frame. We would leave home together in the morning, then after school he'd either go to an after-school program or to my parents' house, and we would return home together in the evening. That became the flow of our life. Scott was calm compared to other kids his age, preferring to play with train toys and observing plants rather than engaging in rough play or using harsh language. His friends were mostly gentle boys and girls. "Mom, today at school, I was looking for caterpillars in the garden." Scott would earnestly tell me these stories, and I found him incredibly endearing. It's truly regrettable that Tristan, living in the same house, doesn't try to see his child's growth. Then, one day, an urgent business trip came up. I was supposed to leave straight from work on Friday, visit clients in different regions, and return home Sunday evening. Thinking it was too much with a 6-year-old son, I tried to adjust the schedule, but due to the client's immovable circumstances, I had to stick to the plan. As usual, I explained the situation to my parents, asking if they could keep him for a longer period. Mom, looking sorry, said, "I'm really sorry, but we're going on a trip from Friday. Everything's already arranged. Are you okay? Should we cancel?" I quickly shook my head. "If that's the case, I'll figure something out. Don't cancel your trip. You rarely get such opportunities. Go and enjoy." When I smiled, Mom kept saying, "I'm sorry," but I smiled relieved. Later, she mentioned they were going to a resort. I hoped they'd enjoy themselves and recharge from their daily fatigue. Then, I talked to Tristan about this. "I need you to take care of Scott this weekend. My parents will be away, and you're the only one I can ask. He's 6 now, so it shouldn't be as hard as when he was a baby." Tristan, sitting on the sofa, crossing his legs and watching TV, looked reluctant. But I can't just leave Mom alone." "Not this again." I tried to stay utterly calm and spoke. "It's just from this Friday to Sunday evening. I can't leave Scott with my parents. You can take care of whatever Mom needs before then. Please, just this weekend, stay home and take care of Scott." I guess so," Tristan repeated his non-committal response. Is it really so hard for him to spend just 3 days away from Sophia and with his own son? I controlled my growing irritation and asked Tristan to handle things with Sophia in advance. "I'm counting on you. This Friday, Saturday, and until Sunday evening. You're responsible for Scott." I emphasized and hurried to prepare for the trip. I remembered the promise we made when Scott was a baby, to work together on the long journey of parenting. Were those words just a lie? It was heartbreaking to see how much Tristan had changed. The business trip was incredibly hard. I flew to clients, attended dinner meetings after negotiations, and then collapsed into sleep at the hotel. The next day involved attending a large-scale training from morning till evening. On the final day, Sunday, I participated in golf and dinner for entertainment after an early morning flight, and by the time I got home, the day was already turning to dusk. The day was clear, and the setting sun painted the sky orange. The sinking sun illuminated my apartment, almost dazzling. I was returning home after 3 days. As I was about to open the door, saying I'm back, I found it unexpectedly locked. Would Tristan lock the door when he's home? With a slight doubt, I unlocked and opened the door. The house was eerily silent. Hello? But there was no reply from Tristan, not even the sound of a TV. The curtains were drawn, blocking the evening sun. Maybe Tristan and Scott went out for some fresh air. That thought in mind, I opened the living room door. What I saw there left me speechless. In the deserted living room, Scott sat alone, silent. The room was dark with no lights or TV on, and Scott was quietly looking at a book on the sofa. The scene was so lonely, sad, and frightening. Scott! Dropping my bag, I ran to him shouting. Why was Scott alone? There was no sign of Tristan. It was clear he was out. Had he left Scott behind to go out alone? Mom? Scott noticed me, closed his book, and clung to me. He must have been lonely, tears brimming in his eyes. What happened? Why are you alone? Where's Dad? Did he go shopping? Seeing my barrage of questions, Scott's face turned red, as if he was about to cry. Struggling to speak, he sobbed. I felt a pain in my heart. Sorry. I shouldn't ask so much at once. Where's Dad? What happened? I hugged Scott and asked again. He answered between sobs. Grandma and they went away. What? I couldn't help but exclaim. Grandma here must mean Sophia. Really? To Grandma's house, leaving you behind? Scott shook his little head and continued. Not home, on a trip to Italy. There were only 2 tickets, so I had to wait alone. After finishing, Scott continued to cry. The book he dropped made a soft sound as it hit the floor. When did they leave? This morning. Holding Scott tightly, I was filled with rage. That man, he knew that leaving meant Scott would be alone, and yet he cheerfully left with Sophia. If it weren't in front of my child, I'd scream out loud. A trip to Italy? I wasn't informed about this at all. If it had been something planned from before, Tristan would have used it as an excuse to refuse to take care of Scott, so it must have been decided abruptly. Why now, of all times? And wasn't Sophia so weak that she could barely shop on her own? If she can manage an Italian trip, requiring nearly 10 hours on a plane, she must be full of energy. I could somewhat accept it if Tristan had taken Scott with him when he went out with Sophia, but leaving behind his own 6-year-old son to go overseas with Sophia? I was disappointed by his lack of responsibility as a father and a human being. It must have been hard for you. You must have felt so lonely. I continued to speak to Scott. It's okay. You won't have to feel this lonely anymore. Mom will take care of everything. I resolved. I decided to give up on Tristan, to think he could disregard his own child to such an extent. Was he always this kind of man? I'm truly disappointed. If that's the case, he's no longer family to me. Several days had passed. After taking a day off as compensatory leave, I went about my commute as usual, and in the evenings I lived happily while my parents looked after Scott. Every day my mobile phone was bombarded with dozens of calls from Tristan. I wasn't ready to speak to Tristan yet, no matter how many hundreds of times he called. I just couldn't bring myself to answer. I had been ignoring it all this time. On the 5th day, I finally thought it was time to talk and whimsically answered what must have been the 100th and something call. As soon as I pressed the call button, Tristan's angry voice came bursting through. "Hazel, where the hell are you right now?" His voice was so loud, it felt like my eardrums would burst. Frowning, I moved the phone away from my ear for a moment. Then, with a firm voice, I told him the truth. "I'm at my parents' house. Scott and I have moved here." Yes, the day Scott was left at home, I had decided to stop being a family with Tristan and ran to my parents' house the next day. It turned out my parents' trip was a celebration for their 60th birthdays. They had returned home the day before I got back from my business trip and welcomed me immediately. Hearing the whole story, my parents were angrier than they had ever been. "Leaving 6-year-old Scott at home alone. Anything could have happened. It's too dangerous. You can move in with me right away. You should cut ties with that husband." After the call about it, Mom flew over to our house and helped me with the moving preparations. My dad also came over furious, saying, "He's unbelievable. He doesn't deserve to be Scott's dad or your husband," while helping with the heavy lifting. And now, 5 days after we moved, I'm on the phone with Tristan. On the phone with Tristan, I continued. "Did you enjoy your trip to Italy with Sophia? Leaving Scott alone at home to go on a trip? How could you? What if something had happened? Do you realize what you've done? I can't be a family with you anymore. That's why I left. I have the divorce papers ready, so please sign them soon." As I was about to hang up, Tristan protested from the other end. "This is crazy. It's too one-sided." Reluctantly, I continued the conversation. "Who's being unreasonable? Didn't I ask you to take care of Scott? Then why did you choose to go on a trip with Sophia instead?" "It's like Sophia saw some movie set in Italy and wanted to go there," he explained. "A movie?" I raised my voice in disbelief, which caught the attention of my parents and Scott in the house. The reason for their sudden trip to Italy was film tourism, an absurd and distorted justification. Even if you wanted to visit the movie setting, why that day? Any other weekend would have been fine. You're always leaving us for Sophia anyway, I argued. "Don't get so worked up. It's annoying. Mom wanted to go, so of course I went with her," he replied nonchalantly. His response and attitude, prioritizing Sophia and ignoring everything else, made me dizzy. Even if you wanted to go on the trip, wasn't there an option to take 3 tickets and bring Scott along? I asked one last question. If he wanted to be with Sophia while taking care of Scott, he could have brought him along. Well, being suddenly taken to Italy would be troublesome, but it's better than being left alone. Being under parental supervision is a small mercy. At my legitimate question, Tristan replied lazily, But taking care of a kid is boring. I managed for 2 days, but by the 3rd morning, I couldn't handle it anymore. It was too much." I felt darkness closing in. Does he not understand what parenting is? What does he think of his own child? Does he realize how irresponsible and inhuman his statement is? My anger exceeded its limit, and I felt my heart growing cold. Without responding to Tristan's words, I silently ended the call. There's no talking to this man. I couldn't be a family, nor did I want any relationship with him as a person. I decided to handle the details of the divorce through a lawyer. When I shared this phone conversation with my parents, my enraged dad nearly flipped the table, which my mom and I managed to stop. There was also a moment when my mom, heartbroken, cried inconsolably, and Scott and I comforted her. With that, I began the process of formally filing for divorce. 2 weeks later, Tristan protested. "Wait a minute. We just got back from Italy and have no money. How can I pay this compensation for the divorce?" During the meeting about the divorce with Tristan, Sophia, and our lawyers, I presented the divorce application and the affidavit for the compensation money. Tristan became infuriated, saying, "Why should I pay compensation just for going on a trip with Mom?" The lawyer explained.
In principle, spouses have a duty of cooperation and support. Tristan's complete lack of involvement in family and childcare duties constitutes a breach of this duty, entitling Hazel to claim compensation.
As I nodded in agreement, the lawyer presented another document to Tristan, my bank account statement.
Tristan, it appears you have been spending Hazel's living expenses without her permission for your mother. Is there any mistake in this statement? What? That's necessary. Mom is my family too. What's wrong with using our living expenses for her? Anyway, I don't have the money to pay this compensation. Do you know how much the Italy trip cost us?
As Tristan grumbled, I took my turn to speak. About that trip to Italy, I started, revealing something I discovered while living at my parents' house. The trip was paid for using our savings, not from our living expenses account, but from a separate one meant for Scott's future. How could you do this? I can't believe it. We had been saving separately for Scott since discovering my pregnancy. Yet Tristan used that money for a trip to Italy, leaving Scott behind. As I clenched my fists in frustration, Sophia looked uncomfortable beside Tristan, spoke up timidly. Tristan, you keep saying we have no money, but that trip didn't cost tens of thousands of dollars, did it? Stung by her words, Tristan turned to her. Sophia's statement, although true, was ironic. The very person who'd been luring Tristan away from our family was now pointing out this fact. Sophia, even for small household items, and a trip to Italy costing a few $1,000s, you didn't have the savings. I delivered the final blow. Tristan gritted his teeth in frustration, and Sophia, surprised, spoke out. What? Tristan, you said you earned well in your planning job at a renowned company. You couldn't even pay for the Italy trip with your own money? I nodded and addressed Sophia. Yes, Tristan hardly had any savings. He mostly does back office work and planning, and I earn more than him. I can't believe this. Tristan lied to me. He has no savings and earns less than you? Although I was irked by being referred to as that woman, my focus was on Tristan. I did ask for Tristan's help with shopping, because my old age pension isn't enough. I thought I was simply relying on my successful son. To depend on your earnings? Oh, how embarrassing! Sophia exaggeratedly covered her face, feigning tears. Tristan stood up hastily, trying to console her.
Mom, it's not like that. I said I earned well to reassure you. And about the shopping, it's my duty to buy what Mom wants. Our home's money is as much mine as it is Hazel's. Is it such a big deal? Be quiet. I've been telling everyone how much you earn. And even if it's about money, I don't want to have anything to do with that woman. As Tristan made excuses, Sophia's voice overpowered his. Don't you feel ashamed as a man? I don't remember raising such a pathetic son. Huh? I did everything for you, Mom. How can you say that now? A mama's boy husband who clings to Sophia and neglects his family. Sophia, who looked down on me, his wife, and tried to monopolize Tristan's time and money. I watched her baseless quarrel with cold eyes. Eventually, I intervened in their pointless argument. Sophia, I'm sorry to upset you, but I'll be filing a compensation claim against you two. Hearing this, Sophia's eyes widened. Why are you involved in this? Compensation. What have I done to you? Every day and all weekend, you kept Tristan confined to your house, making him neglect his duties at home. Plus, unknowingly to me, you spent my money through Tristan. Even on expensive brand bags and clothes, that was my money. I looked at the lawyer, who nodded and presented Sophia with a compensation claim. Don't be ridiculous. A frivolous and tasteless woman who appeared out of nowhere and got pregnant before marriage has no right to speak to me. Sophia yelled, spitting in anger. I didn't know, so it can't be helped. I thought my son was showing his gratitude to me. Earning freely, overshadowing your son, and then not letting me use your money? How awful. I should have stopped the marriage back then. Having such an ugly woman as my son's wife. Oh, it's the worst. Sophia, isn't that way of speaking a bit too much? Reaching my limit with her vulgar insults, I retorted to Sophia. It's not about gender or money. It's about capability. I have the ability to earn, and your son lacked it. That's all. Even if it were his money, spending it lavishly as a parent is questionable. Sophia screamed, "Be quiet! I don't need lectures from a kid!" I said firmly, "Which of us is the real ugly one, Sophia? The one who judges people by gender and wealth, or the one who works hard and earns respect?" Sophia tried to lunge at me across the table. At that moment, the lawyer cleared his throat loudly, signaling the end of the discussion. You may have your opinions, but this compensation amount has been legally determined, so please accept it. Any remaining issues should be handled through my law firm." The lawyer forcefully concluded a situation that could have turned into a three-way fight. I left the meeting and returned home to Scott and my parents. Tristan and Sophia were still arguing as they disappeared into the city. "Mom, welcome back." Scott ran to me as I returned. My parents, worried about me, listened to today's events, sometimes angry, sometimes sad. At least now we could finally have a peaceful life. The current house where I live with my parents isn't the house where I grew up. The old house was demolished, the land sold, and a few years ago, considering the future, we moved to this barrier-free home. In the kitchen, Mom was preparing dinner, and I joined her to cook a steaming hot stew. Around the warm meal, we enjoyed a pleasant family time. Scott, smiling, talked about his day at school. It was the birth of a warm and restful home. Tristan, still working at the same head office, became the subject of rumors among the staff. Tristan and Sophia, burdened with the compensation payment, continued their lavish lifestyle without reducing their living standards. They spent extravagantly on trips inspired by movies and expensive brand clothes, racking up considerable debt within months. They had already spent the inheritance from father-in-law, and eventually had to sell the house and land father-in-law left. Reluctantly, Tristan and Sophia moved into a cheap apartment. Even with Tristan's income, they struggled to pay off debts, forcing Sophia to take up part-time work. Sophia, valuing status and age, found it hard to adjust to taking instructions from younger supervisors and colleagues, working with a sense of humiliation to pay off debts. After the divorce, rumors about Tristan's debt and his mama's boy behavior became widespread. Unable to endure the ridicule for being the ex-husband of a successful woman and a mama's boy, Tristan eventually resigned voluntarily. Overwhelmed with the stress from working under younger colleagues and hearing daily complaints from Sophia, Tristan's mental health deteriorated, making it difficult to find a new job. His physical and mental state affected his appearance and attitude, and he remained unemployed. Eventually, he had to settle for a low-paying, irregular job, working tirelessly to pay off debts and the compensation. This way, the one-on-one parent-child time Sophia so desired to steal from me won't be achievable for a while. Forced into long hours of low-wage work, the two are living in poverty to pay off debts and compensation. As for my family and me, things were different. "Mom, what's going on? Dinner looks amazing today," I exclaimed as I saw the feast on the table after returning from work. Heaps of fried chicken, a vibrant salad with lettuce, tomatoes, and eggs, a steaming soup full of ingredients, and even a small pizza. "It's to celebrate your promotion to section chief." Mom's happy voice came from the kitchen. I continued to excel in my fulfilling job, earning trust from my subordinates and peers, leading to my promotion. Hearing this, Mom quickly made a feast for us. "Hey, I helped microwave the pizza," Scott proudly announced, running up to me. I patted his head, and he laughed joyfully. "I never thought my daughter would turn out so well," Dad said. Mom interjected, "Well, work isn't just about being smart, right? It's about trust. Hazel's honest and straightforward character has really resonated with people." Hearing that, I felt tears welling up. I have people who watch over my way of life, a family that praises my character, the ability to watch Scott grow up healthy. Mom, thank you. And Dad, too. Sorry for all the trouble. I'll work even harder for the both of you. Mom gently stroked my back as I wiped my tears. Scott came over and hugged me, saying, Mom, I love you.